So if you have anything else you need to know, just put it in the chat. But yeah, we're going to get going so that we stick to time. Okay, it's just going to be sharing my screen here. Okay. Hopefully you guys can all see that. It should just be a starting screen. Can you guys see that? Maybe someone can let me know.
We can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, yep, so 9:35, let's kick off with this. Where we're going, just get that there. So just a very brief intro to anyone who doesn't know Project 90. Our vision is to inspire and mobilize society towards a sustainably developed and equitable low carbon future. Our mission is to bring about significant positive change in the way we as humans engage with Earth systems and each other. And so part of this is obviously getting South Africans involved in a just energy transition. So what I'm going to be talking about is the research approach. We had a very brief overview of 2 points in the energy landscape for the Western Cape, why the city of Cape Town is important, a very brief overview of the strategic priorities that will all be in the report, and then a choice of the focus topic, which is what Peter will be talking about. So very briefly, an energy transition we are looking at is a shift from our current energy system to one that is better, and by better we mean sustainability, environmental impact, climate change, human health, and economics. When we talk about a just energy transition, we mean that the principles of justice are applied during this shift in the energy system. Now, those of you who are familiar with the space will know there's been ongoing debate about the nitty-gritty of this and the details. So we are not delving into definitions and all of that. This is the basics of it. And when I did all the interviews, which we'll talk about now, it was more action orientated. I asked people, what actions at least cover the basics? And as long as we're moving in the right direction, the exact definitions can be worked out, because that's an ongoing discussion nationally. So what we did is we were focusing on energy because there are other parts of just transition. We decided to look at the Western Cape, as the Western Cape has shown that the progress in the energy sector in terms of wanting to be more energy independent. I interviewed people both in Western Cape government and City of Cape Town, among others, to see what people inside of government had to say. And the context obviously involved, struggling economy, energy challenges, and COVID-19. And the idea of this was just to get an overview of what are strategic priorities for local level just transition actions specifically related to energy. So then what we did is we took these findings, we had a chat with others in civil society who work in this space, we tried to identify some combination areas, and then from that we decided to pick one to focus on more. And that one was, how do we tackle energy poverty, but specifically, how do we engage with communities to co-create solutions? Because these are the people who are dealing with energy poverty on a day-to-day basis. So very briefly, the importance of electricity as a focus is, if you look, this is for the Western Cape, if you look at energy consumption, the liquid fuels on the left make up about 53%. So obviously, the shift to electric vehicles and with transport is very important. However, if you now look at what happens with emissions in the province, the majority of emissions come from production of electricity. So this is one reason to focus on electricity now. And the second reason is in terms of what electricity means for people. So if you look at energy consumption by sector, you can see that transport and industry are the most, and residential is only 10%. However, when you look at electricity consumption, it's mainly residential. So again, our report focuses mainly on electricity because A, the climate change concerns, and B, the effect it can have on people, and a just energy transition speaks to both of those. These are just a few figures. Don't worry about all the details. The point here is that Cape Town as a municipality is the majority of the population, the majority of informal settlements, houses, indigent households, also in terms of energy use, emissions, and economic output. This last figure to pay attention to here is the number of indigent households. Now, by indigent, we broadly mean that households where their income is such that they will struggle to meet basic services, which obviously links to energy poverty. These numbers can be a bit difficult, and they're not necessarily exact, but if you look at roughly 15 to 20% of a population of 6 million, this is a lot of people. So energy poverty is a real concern. To very briefly go through these, because this is not the focus of our talk today, it's just to lay the scene. When I did interviews with people in the City of Cape Town, Western Cape government, core components that came out was very clearly tackling energy poverty. Part of this is because there's high electrification rates, but still people can't afford it. Secondly is to increase energy efficiency. This was a priority because it has support, you can save money, you can do it fast, you can create jobs. Adding renewable energy sources is obviously part of the transition. Interestingly, as people probably know, the city has applied to get renewable energy power from independent power producers. That's probably going to take quite some time. So the lower scale generation facilities are going to be important in that. Then there's creating jobs in the green economy. So some of those link directly to energy and some are just part of the extended value chains. And improving public transport. We saw obviously that transport uses a lot of energy, but improving public transport has other social benefits. It allows more people to get involved in economic activities, and if you improve them, they can wait less, and those kind of things. Very briefly, some cross-cutting factors that apply to all of these. Policy and regulatory certainty came out a lot in my interviews. For example, renewable energy in the Atlantis Special Economic Zone could be manufacturing renewable energy components, but with the IRP as it is, even though it's come out over a year ago, there hasn't been much movement on that. So this is a frustration that was expressed. Improved stakeholder engagement is just generally part of good governance, and we'll be talking about in the next section. The idea of municipal resilience, all of these core components, if you sort out energy poverty, increase the efficiency, add renewables, it all makes municipalities more resilient, which is important. The idea of supporting microeconomies, microeconomies, we mean your informal sector, small businesses and that, is, although they might not be the biggest contributors to GDP, they put bread on the table for a lot of people. So it's important that they're included. Financing is obviously, how do we do all these things? Not only looking at municipal finance models, but possibly accessing green finance and other options to pay for these. Transition management was probably the most interesting question, where the answers were all different from people, which basically meant, firstly, this function doesn't really sit with anyone yet. And secondly, people don't necessarily know who should be managing it. So that's an area for possible future work. And access to information is not just about transparency about things like energy pricing, but like in communities, how do you allow them internet access and those kind of things so that they can get to the information. So lastly, before we move on to Peter, we'll talk about the next one, is how did we select our topic? Well, it was very clear from all the discussions with government officials that energy poverty and access to electricity is important. Generally, and this came out of our previous research, when you look at these kind of things, your stakeholder engagement needs to happen up front. There's no point doing it at the end once you've done the work and asking people. People need to be involved from the beginning. Over the years, as many of you on this call will probably know, that's often been pointed out, for example, at hearings about electricity pricing, why are the people most affected not involved? And the last point is just acknowledging that municipalities, by their position and their mandate, are most close to people. So, their role is important. So that's why we focused on energy poverty in the Western Cape and how do you improve systems of community engagement, which almost by default will be at a municipal level. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Peter now, who will talk about the focus for this talk. Unless there's any questions of clarity, as I said, the debate later on can be about it in general. Using the the participants function. If there are any questions of clarity, you can ask now. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Peter. Okay. Peter, I think the floor is yours then.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Richard. Can you hear me? I can't seem to...
Yep, I can hear you.
I'll put my video on as well. So, yes, thanks for the introduction and setting the scene as to why we focused on energy poverty and community engagement. And I just want to add the justice element, the justice side of a just transition, and why community is critical. I think we all, most of us here, familiar with the definition of energy poverty and energy being needed required for basic human needs. And whilst energy is not expressly recognized in the Constitution as a human right, it's implicit in the founding provisions and the Bill of Rights. So energy poverty is a lack of access to reliable and safe energy choices. But it's not just about access to electricity, it's also about affordability, and that came up repeatedly in the interview. So the research has pointed for quite some time that even those people who have access to electricity, poor people, are continuing to use unsafe and poor quality fuels to meet their energy needs. So if we're looking at engagement and community engagement, and we're considering it from the local sphere or from government, what does it mean? So we did some research into what public participation is and where it resides, and it actually sits very squarely in the Constitution and the country's democratic governance principles. And this is evident in many frameworks and government policies. I looked at a whole range, and public participation and engagement are in the heart of the Constitution and other documents. So whilst there's no formal legislative procedures on how to engage, government is doing so. And when I looked at the Western Cape and interviewed a whole range of people, so there's province, City of Cape Town, the other municipalities, there are many formal measures and systems that are in place to communicate and engage with people. So that's government websites, newspapers, radio, social media, etc. And then there are where strategies, plans, draft bylaws, and the integrated development plan particularly, but not only, these documents are put out for public comment. And ward councillors, and I spoke to two, play a really important interface between the local authority and communities. And they use various social media tools like WhatsApp and Facebook. But the one person, well, both the people I interviewed said that actually going to people's homes and being on the ground was very important. So what did the government officials and politicians I spoke to said? There was general agreement that engagement with communities is really critical and important, but it's hard, it's difficult, and it's not happening at the level the legislation requires and that government hoped for. And in relation to energy poverty, one or two respondents said to me that it's almost as if the city raises expectations that they cannot meet, and so there are problems there. Mainstream media, I think we would all know, doesn't reach everybody, and especially the poor. And consultation often becomes a tick box exercise. I was also told that there's not one solution for one community or for all communities. You've got to develop individual solutions, and that demands resources, human resources, financial resources that they don't have. Often officials are seen as authoritarian. So somebody said to me, when you rock up at a community in a government vehicle, you're already a little bit on a back foot. So one of the things that came up repeatedly in all the interviews was an intermediary or a community liaison person would be critical. Another hugely important point was around information, education, communication, that it's not done adequately and it really needs working on. I'll say a bit more about that later. And then another area was that the energy and poverty are cross-cutting, and the silo way in which government departments operate is not conducive to good engagement, and there needs to be better alignment. So in fact, one or two people said to me, you know, we host a meeting, and then a question is raised that's not in our key performance area, and then we become a messenger, but the messaging doesn't work. So we go to another department, doesn't go back to the community. Okay, so what did I also interviewed a lot of people from civil society, and there were others who engaged with community and youth, and there were some questionnaires completed. So critical was you can't start developing solutions if you don't understand what the situation is, how people are using energy, what sources of energy they're using, and it's no good sending in an external consultant. It needs to be done by the community themselves, have to be engaged in a kind of data enumeration process. And this painting of the picture helps for everybody engaged to say, where are the priority areas? What should we be focusing on? And you know, one community might identify that external lighting is the main problem, or it's something individual to their household. People really need to, in the community, want to be designing, influencing a project and involved in decision making. There needs to be, what came up very, very strongly was about building relationship, building trust between the community and the municipality. And again, having an intermediary like civil society really would work. And some of what came up was around service delivery protests. I'll say a little bit more about that in a little while. Richard, am I doing okay with time? Communities are really frustrated and they're not adequately informed. And some of the youth and the communities that were engaged with for the research said that what they really want from government is to use field workers, not letters, to communicate, to listen to people, to take their needs into the planning processes. What came up really strongly also was the affordability. There is work happening out there, and there are engagements happening. So I don't want to just give a view that nothing is happening, and I'm not going into the detail of this. I think Reshmi might talk about the Green Cape work just now, but the City of Cape Town's Low Income Services Unit are doing really great work. So is the Department of Human Settlements, Informal Settlement Support Program, where they've really engaged with civil society in their informal settlement work, and ISHAC. So I really want to get to the recommendations. So I'm just quickly going to go through the themes. So the intention in legislation is there, it's good. But in practice, it's very formalistic. And we need to look at why that is. Public participation and engagement is often presented as an activity, a call for a comment or formal meeting. There aren't the resources really to go and engage in the way that it needs to happen. And that means running people-centered processes over time. You can't find solutions unless you understand the problem. And I think we would all know that from our personal experiences. I touched on earlier around service delivery protests and managing trauma and years of hardship and living in the way that people are living. It requires an appreciation of trauma, of hardship, of woundedness. And that again is not a one tick box exercise. And then we did quite a bit around where the municipalities are hugely constrained. I mean, I could talk for 10 minutes on that alone. So they're not just free to increase free basic electricity or expand their services. The municipal financial model is not working. I'm not going to say more on that right now, but I just really want to flag that there's a constraint on the government side. So the recommendations are, they're at three levels. One is a systemic change from the political structural side and the sort of top-down view, but we don't focus there. That's a whole different area of work. What we focused on was more the small stepping stones of change that reside in the local space. And we came up with some visible, tangible shifts. I like this photograph because these people are trying to resolve a problem together. And I really love this quote from Adam Habib because I think it sums up what we've tried to do here. If there's one truism in the world of social transformation, it has to be that we are the agents of our own liberation. Of course, this agency has to be part of a collective if it is to have systemic effect, but it does require individuals' full and active involvement. And that, I think, is what our recommendations call for. So this is a sort of higher level stuff that I think Richard has already spoken about, the municipal financial model, regulations, and so on. What we came up with, which we'd really like to engage with you today, is what can the Western Cape, what can we be doing in this province? And so we really felt if we could set up an energy solutions working group made up of a range of stakeholders, really engaging with what is happening now, what can we do differently, how can we do it, how do we raise funds? Communication and education, that was repeated by all the people I interviewed and the research that I did. People don't understand the constraints of government and what they're operating under. And I think that government maybe doesn't really see all the constraints and the difficulties of the communities, and people don't understand, why am I paying this much for electricity and why is somebody else seemingly paying a different rate? And yeah, so we thought maybe we could establish a mobile show house that could be a trailer that explains how tariffs are set, how FBE, free basic electricity, is managed, how a hot box might work, and that can move around the province. A lot of people said there needs to be an intermediary between government and the community. So let's develop a community liaison initiative. And then finally, set up a pilot project. So choose one community, it could be an informal settlement, one poor community, and then really try and shift the engagement picture. And let's learn from that, what worked, what didn't. And maybe it's developing on what Green Cape have been doing and what the city is doing, or the Department of Human Settlements. And now I'm handing over to Richard. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Peter. I'm just going to quickly mention a few things on this picture. I know that the picture here is quite busy. It will be in the report when it comes out. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think this is shared off Peter's screen, so you probably won't see my cursor. But anyway, if you look at the right hand, let's start at the left-hand side. The left-hand side is general public participation. So the example there is NERSA hearings on electricity. That exists. It's legally required, but there are some improvements that can be made, such as the venue, the language, documenting properly how people's concerns were taken on board. That's not where we focus, because we thought what we actually need is something more along the lines of what's happening on the right-hand side. Now, there are examples, and Rishmi might speak to us about them, but this is, instead of a system that's sort of passive, where you put something out and say, look, anyone can come and chat, that's it. This is acknowledging that, particularly with energy poverty, it relates to, you know, communities where they can't always just go and attend meetings that are far away. So the idea is that you need to go to the communities themselves. And there's three main points to this. The first one is obviously identifying which communities this applies to. And then, as Peter's mentioned, you need enumerators or people from the community to really give a picture of what their circumstances are. You know, what are their energy needs? How much are they short each month in terms of being able to pay? What is the, you know, all of these kind of things that we can't guess from the outside. We need community members to tell us that. And then you move down to the second arrow is, as Peter mentioned, community liaison workers who are skilled and trained and trusted, and there's continuity. We often heard from people, it's no good if each month they deal with someone different. You need to have, and that's why it's in the title there, relationship building. And then this idea in the dark blue box is a sort of exchange event. And this talks about the education and communication part, because, you know, some of the interviews we heard, if you arrive and want to speak to people about energy, but they don't understand your side of the story, it becomes a one-way thing. So this idea of an exchange event is almost like two parts. In the first part, the municipality or the city or whoever can explain to communities, this is our constraints, this is our side of the story. And then on the other half of the exchange, just like a proper dialogue, hear from the community what all their, challenges are, and then you work forward, and then you have these, you know, as regularly as you can. And that is a bit of a departure from a sort of open invite public participation event at a big hall somewhere where people come and sit down and just give input one way. So it's just a sort of more holistic approach. We understand that it is involves a lot more work, but it sounds like this is the way we actually need to co-create solutions. And co-creation speaks to this idea of social justice. It's about getting people involved. So that's enough of that. What we've, so I think, Peter, you can probably stop sharing that screen now. We've got 4 people who have kindly joined us just to give brief inputs. They've seen the draft report. Before that, I saw one question in the chat. So if there are any other questions of clarity at this stage, please feel free to ask. But I see Kim had said to Peter, is the question of trust regarding the municipal employees or the political appointees in the municipality? Peter, do you have an answer for that question of clarity?
It's the trust is across the board. So it's between when you say employees, I think it's the officials, and it really came across from across the board, the need to build trust, and the protests, the service delivery protests, the promises, the sense of letdown, and then interspersed with violence that impacts on everybody. The trust is not, it's complex, and it needs to happen over time. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks for that. Before we move on to the first of our four speakers who will give inputs from their sides, is any other questions of clarity from anyone? As I said earlier, there is a raise hand function in the participants list. But if I don't see any of those, they're not popping up on my side. Okay, let's move on. The first in order to give us some thoughts is Farouk Kasim. He is a councillor in the Cape Town City Metropolitan Council and serves on the Energy and Climate Change Portfolio Committee, and is also a member of Sub-Council 10, which is in Khayelitsha. So thanks, Farouk. I know you've got lots of thoughts on this. Would you like to share any responses with us?
Yes, let me briefly.
And you're welcome to use your video if you would like. Yeah.
All right, but you've seen who I am, so we can switch that off. Right. I would really prefer to answer questions, but let me get through some very important points. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Right. So to begin with, what one needs to understand that every single municipality has to put on the table what is called the integrated development plan. This is a 5-year plan, and each year this plan has to be updated, revised, and amended. And if we need to put anything in the way of service delivery, it has to go into the IDP. That then attracts budget, and then the departments know exactly what needs to be done. So if something is not in the IDP, it cannot be done. Now, in the city of Cape Town, I have been pushing very hard for the establishment of microgrids. So this would enable a lot of poor communities to be able to get a permanent source of free electricity. They will then need to be organized, and they will need to be trained, and maintenance will be their responsibility. The advantage with microgrids is that you could get external sponsors. For example, it could be a microgrid, it could be a Cell C, or it could be Telkom, or any big company could sponsor one such microgrid. And the city of Cape Town, would possibly be the group that would come in and establish the whole thing and hand over to communities. In Stellenbosch, they are being given, a number of homes are being given a solar panel and equipment with battery to make sure that they have lighting and charging facilities for their cell phones. Now, this is already being done in Stellenbosch. The city of Cape Town is also promoting the use of wonder bags. These are the cooking bags that allow for slow cooking. We also would like to see solar cooking ovens and solar cooking pots. And there's a whole lot that can be done with recycled cans or beer cans or cool drink aluminum cans to create very, very effective solar heating for homes. Now, the city of Cape Town really can do more if groups like yourselves get organized, and then at the beginning of the new term, which would be in August of next year, clamor to have in the IDP provision for energy justice and transition. So the more we can put into the IDP, the more we can extract out of it. But the magic is really in the IDP. So I'd really like you to ask me questions in order that I can then, clarify you on what can be done and how it can be done and how all of us can work together as a team to be able to achieve what at the moment might seem to be impossible, but really is within the realms of possibility. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Brooke. Yeah, so that was an invitation essentially. Before we move on to our next input, does anyone have any particular questions for Brooke around IDP or anything else you mentioned? Otherwise, as I say, we are having sort of an open debate once the other three have contributed. But yeah, you can just raise your hand if anyone has any questions. And I just want to check with Gabe. Okay, so I see Mr. Madasi Mayer. Would you like to ask a question? You just need to unmute.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, my question is about IDP. I'm very sad about this thing of IDP. Meetings. We put a lot of things according to civil service department, but after a year, going again to another IDP, we don't see things that we raise on the last IDP, which means it gives another bad result from the city side. Secondly, how can our communities be aware of these energy problems if the city is not coming to the level of the poor communities and address this thing of energy? Because I see only the NGOs that are busy doing this engagement with certain communities, which means I believe it works well because most of the people now are becoming aware what is the problem in energy. Can the speaker can elaborate about this thing? When is the public participation is going to take place? Because he's mentioning the next IDP will be next year. But people are suffering now. There's no action. I'm staying in the poor communities, disadvantaged communities. I never hear even a member of the city of Cape Town come and address this thing. Can we elaborate there? Thank you.
Can I come in, Richard?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Yeah, you see, you did mention, for example, that I am on Sub-Council 10, which is in Khayelitsha. And you see, in every ward, there is a ward councillor, and the ward councillor is the person, the ideal person to link with. Because when the IDP is being formulated and each year when it is being revised, people have 3 months in which to make their comments. And if, the people who are the ward councillors participate, take the message out, and if you could use, for example, Radios Bonella and other radio, you would be able to reach many people. And then the city could organize. If, for example, someone approached our portfolio committee and said, we would like an exhibition to be done in a certain spot at a certain time, that could be quite easily arranged. Now, and that is how the knowledge could be spread. The fact is that we do have an IDP at the present moment, And this IDP is going to run until next year. So within that IDP, we have put in some elements, but with more support from groups like yourselves, we would be able to build a more ambitious plan, and we would be able to find funding. You see, we have in the city of Cape Town what is called the small scale embedded generation, where we're encouraging residences and businesses to install solar panels. And if they create excess energy, that excess energy could then be passed off to people who are suffering. And if more people came into the program, more energy could be made available. If, for example, every citizen who has an account with the city of Cape Town was told, pay 100 rands extra for 2 years, and we will then be able to put up massive amount of solar PVs. It will be good for the people who are putting their money in, because as you know, Eskom is in court at present wanting to get, I think, 16 billion rands back from consumers. So the price of electricity will keep going up and up if we rely only on Eskom. But if thousands and thousands of people in Cape Town are going the solar route, we would have an abundance of electricity to be able to supply poorer communities either on a discounted rate or even free. So we should look at all the possibilities, and there are many indeed. And I wish we could spend one conference only looking at how we can expand the supply of electricity and how we could pass off excess energy to people who need it, but who do not have the means to afford it. Thank you.
Thanks for that response, Farouk. I'm sure there probably are more points on this, but I want to make sure that our other speakers get their chance to give a brief input before we go into open discussion. So I'd like to invite next Lydia Peterson to give us some thoughts. Lydia is from Mitchell's Plain, and she's the coordinator of the Women's Circle and is also involved with the Million Climate Jobs campaign, is passionate about transition to renewables, and might speak to us about some of the difficulties that people have with electricity becoming unaffordable. So Lydia, over to you, and thank you for making time.
Yes, good morning, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, maybe just speak a little up, but we can hear you.
Okay, let us just do something else here. Okay, is that much better now?
That's good, thank you.
Okay, I'm Lydia Peterson. I'm from Mitchell's Plain. I'm a community activist. As you rightfully have said, that I'm campaigning for a just energy transition. My view in the communities that I work is that not much is being done in our communities in the indigent sector. What we feel is that there is no awareness programs there. What we have found also is that if you owe the city anything, it gets deducted when you do your electricity purchase. What we also feel is that what we do as community workers, the city should actually be doing that. The awareness programs, the inclusiveness of all the indigent households, that should be done. It should have been done a very long time ago. As for the IDP, not much is known in the communities about that. We just know that it comes around every 5 years. The buck is being passed from one local government to the other when the elections come and go. And like I said, not much is being done, and our community is frustrated at the electricity hikes that comes around every year. And they feel that whatever they pay is, they just accept it just like that. So if an indigent household cannot survive on 10% of what they get, how are they supposed to accommodate any electricity hikes during every year? And us as activists that's working in these communities have to see all these things that pass by in a household, where an indigent household sometimes are led by a mother, a grandmother who is on a social grant. And for them, it is about putting food on the table. and sometimes they have to resort to so much social ills that they cannot cope. And also the fact that they have to resort to using other energy sources to just make ends meet. And sometimes it's very unsafe. So what we feel is that inclusion for our indigenous homes, that is not on the cards right now. I see that the political will for the city, what they have said is that there should be more inclusiveness of the poor. I'd like to see that happen. And as far as we see, nothing has happened so far. We just hope that with this project that's now going, we will be able to see more results. Thank you, Richard.
Great. Thank you very much, Lydia, for your inputs there. The same as the previous speaker, before we move on to Reshmi, does anyone have any particular questions for Lydia about her experience in the community where she stays, or engagement with IDPs, or anything like that? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands come up. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to our next speaker, which, as you will have seen in the program, is Reshmi Volvers. And, as she said to me, she's modeled her career on a commitment to sustainability, access to energy and diversity. She's senior energy analyst at Green Cape, and also works on projects related to alternate service delivery and growth of energy services within the green economy. And certainly our take on the work that the alternate service delivery unit has done is along the lines of the type of stuff we would like to see more of. So Reshmi, if you would like to give us some thoughts, that would be great.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, Richard and Peter, and thanks for the work that you guys have been doing, particularly with your report. Hello to everyone else as well.
I think you might just need to speak up a little bit or get a little closer to the microphone.
Okay, hold on one second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. I'll just keep my microphone in my mouth though. Great. So, I mean, I just want to tell you a little bit about the ASDU because I think it's been mentioned a few times, and I don't know if you have had a chance to read the reports or see our work yet. But I work for an NPO called Green Cape. We are set up to remove any barriers to the growth of the green economy in South Africa. And we've been doing a lot of work in Cape Town in the Western Cape. And we do work with the governments here as well. We started a unit called the Alternative Service Delivery Unit about 3 years ago. And we're working in 3 different communities in the city of Cape Town. The unit itself is an independent off-grid service delivery unit, which works in underserviced and underserved areas. To date, we have only worked on private land, so please note that it's not on city land, and so we haven't really been beholden to those parameters as well. What we do is we work with the communities in those areas. As a first step, we actually just go in and we enumerate these communities with volunteers from the area so that they have a data about themselves. We don't go in saying that we're going to be providing energy services or we're going to be providing alternative water services or whatever it is. It's just actually about mobilizing communities to have the data about themselves. And with that information, they can decide if they want to take that information to municipalities, if they want to take it to a different funder or service provider. They can decide what they want to do with it. Ultimately, in each of these 3 communities, they decided to allow us to continue our work in these areas. What we did then, the data that we collected, data alone is not enough. You have to interpret that data. And we did that through a co-design process with the community's leaders. And with some of the community members themselves. And we try to really understand if that data was representative of their communities. There are very many reasons why data alone is not sufficient or accurate even. Well, one, there's this level of distrust that has been alluded to earlier on and in the report that's been picked up by a couple of different stakeholders. And also there's survey fatigue. Every other organization wants to come in and find out information about these communities and then just never comes back to the communities with the information that they've collected. So there's all of these factors. There's also the point that people might just be embarrassed to admit that they use, bush toilets versus flush toilets, or they don't want to admit their income because they're worried about what that might impact their grant funding, or they, for obvious reasons, don't want to say that they're using informal energy connections in their homes. So variety of reasons. So we try to use that data, we verify it, and then we work with the community leaders to understand what their ideals are for their community, what their challenges are in their community, because communities, they're not homogenous and they know their context better than anyone else. So engaging with them, involving them from the beginning in the decision-making and in designing their solutions for solving their challenges is critical. I noticed some challenges on people being worried about raising expectations, and also the lack of interest or skills amongst residents to comment on, how their challenges should be solved. Firstly, I think that active facilitation is critical, and that's something that governments should be putting money into people who are able to actually facilitate conversations and to build trust in these communities. Firstly, in our experience, because we were warned before we went into any of these communities to work in, that we shouldn't be making any promises that we can't keep. So, and fair enough. So one of the things to say here is that engagement alone does not create expectations. Careful facilitation can ensure that people understand what's being offered or what the processes are to be, and then to also to ensure that no promises are made that can't be kept. And also, instead of just in terms of that comment on people's lack of interest or their inability to comment for whatever reason, instead of just receiving comments, a good facilitator tries to really understand and to actually, actively listen and to really capture the essence of the challenge that's being conveyed. Of course, communication of information is important, but these people are living with these challenges day to day, and this is their lived reality. So their inability to articulate it shouldn't mean that they don't understand what their challenges are. I think it's our responsibility as NGOs, NPOs, the private sector, the public sector, everyone else really who's trying to solve these problems, to really listen to what's being said and to try and make sure that we understand what is needed. But before I go into the recommendations, I diverted a little bit there. I want to tell you what we did in these 3 communities that we've been working in so far. So we worked with them, we understood what their challenges were. We tried to get them to, we appreciate that there are many challenges in these communities for sure, but we wanted to ask them to prioritize which challenges they wanted us to solve using energy. So which of these challenges being solved would be the most urgent, and which of these is the most, could be the most impactful, had potential to change lives. And so in some of these communities, in Witsan in particular, our data showed that 80% of the children in this community did not go to school, and that they were walking at least maybe up to 1 kilometer at night to go to the toilets on the periphery. We learned that obviously there was a lack of services in that area and so on, but they also didn't have any, because of the lack of education and the lack of abilities to have social enterprise, they really didn't have a lot going for them. But with that information, we managed to go out to find a service provider called Think Wi-Fi, and I'm sure I hope you have heard about this project, where they are offering solar-powered Wi-Fi enabled streetlights in this community. And so now people are able to, while they can connect to the internet, they are able to have area lighting where previously they felt unsafe going out at night. With the increased crime in that area. And they're able to have social enterprises around these streetlights. In 2 other communities on airport land, we have tended to find service providers that can provide solar home systems. And in this whole process, we try to understand what people's affordability is, because it's not to say that people in informal settlements or in underserved communities can't pay. If you think about what they're paying for the alternative, it's it's sometimes exorbitant. Affordability is it's something to be really highlighted. We have a 85% electrification rate in the whole of South Africa, but I don't think that's an accurate number when it comes to people who can actually have reliable, safe access to energy, throughout the month. If you do have access to formal electrification, you might be able to use it for the first 2 weeks, maybe, if you're lucky, and then after that you can't afford to use it anymore because the price of electricity is so high. But also, on the other hand, people in these 2 communities that we were working in were paying 50 Rand a week for just candles. And then there's the cost of gas, there's the cost of paraffin, there's the cost of everything else that they have to use. So instead we developed a business model which meant that they were paying 50 Rand a week for a solar home system, which at the end of 3 years they own when they're being relocated. And that really diverts that unproductive use of money even to something that that is more of an asset to them. When we talk about, in informal economies, so much is unregulated. So while I might be paying a certain amount for gas here, in some of these communities, they're paying way more than what is actually required, which is counterintuitive because they possibly have less money to spend on it than I might. So just to move on to some of the recommendations that you had, we can't go from black to white overnight. There are a series of injustices to be overcome on our path to a just transition, particularly with the just energy transition. We need to find out what that middle ground is. It's also important to understand that government is severely constrained. Informal settlements are growing at a rapid rate. I think currently there are 460 or 7, there are 400 and something informal settlements. It's double the number it was 5 years ago. And they can't, and I don't think they should be expected to deliver all of these services, but they should develop frameworks that encourage and enable active citizenry and also enable the ability to hold hands with the private sector to create public-private partnerships. But for that, we need to tackle what's even allowed in their MFMA in terms of asset transfer and ownership to help them or to help us help them. Their IDPs and other plans need to also take into account that informality is on the rise and that it is here to stay. And it needs to be an adaptable plan that encourages quick decision-making and turnaround. We've been working with a few different line departments in the city of Cape Town that are responsible for service delivery, so across energy, water, and waste, to really understand their challenges and to help them systematically or systemically be more open to alternative technologies, models, and services to improve service delivery. And all of which demands community engagement and honest community engagement. So I think Councillor Kasim mentioned he hoped for a conference which showcases all of these possibilities, and that's exactly what we hope to do in around March, April next year. We want to showcase best case examples of projects that have been delivered around the country and in the world, which make use of innovative business models or alternative tech and services that can be contextualized for the Cape Town context, and which municipalities can take learnings from in terms of how to adapt their own systems to allow this. So from this experience, I think that government has plenty of working groups, many working on the exact same thing and not talking to each other. I don't think they need new ones. I think they need to figure out their systems such that they're able to contract private or nonprofit or NGOs to do this work, because we do have the experience, we have built the relationships, we can foster the better working conditions between city and communities where there is a massive distrust, and probably due to a lack of honest communication, less than their actual delivery, because it's not a last note. I think City of Cape Town and the province has done a tremendous amount of work, but I think the communication of that is poor or sometimes misrepresented. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Reshmi. That's there's a lot of good points there. Does anyone have any specific questions of clarity for Reshmi before we move on? You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand. If I don't see any, that was obviously because you put it through very clear.
There was a lot of information. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I mean, so just quickly to some of the things you mentioned, like this role of facilitation and how to manage expectations. I mean, we've heard that a lot in our community discussions, and that's in that image I showed, where community liaison officers would fulfill that role. They know how to do this kind of thing. But I think the point we were trying to make is that this is the type of engagement we see as being the way forward, and it's not the type of thing that can happen in a straightforward, open invite public participation where people just rock up at a venue. The same with what you're talking about getting the information as to what communities want to prioritize. And Peter mentioned the same thing. For one people, it might be streetlights, for others, it might be something different. And I guess the real sort of question we are trying to delve with, and hopefully when we get to the open conversation just now, is how do we get more of this type of thing? I mean, we very much understand the constraints. I mean, ASDU and Green Cape can only do so much, and as Project 90, we can only do so much, and the other NGOs. But how, if there is agreement that this is the right way of doing things, how can we ramp it up to do more of it? I think that's a key question, maybe for anyone here to think about. And that speaks to your point, Reshmi, you're talking about setting up these frameworks for active citizenry. It's not that government has to do everything, but at least put it in place so people can help themselves when they can, like that photo Peter had of people working together to insulate a room. Okay, folks, I've had a message. So Wandile was going to be speaking next. He is an activist from Khayelitsha. It seems he's had difficulty getting to the office there where he would be speaking from. And I think this is almost an example exactly of the type of things we're speaking about. I mean, this is having trouble getting to our own event. And, this is the type of thing we're expecting community members often just to arrive at places for national meetings on these kind of things. So hopefully he does arrive and he can give some input. But until then, we'd like to now open the discussion with everyone who's here on any of the topics that are raised. I mean, our interest would be if we can move towards action and getting things happen. But we also wanted to be open that if there's particular issues you want to ask any of the speakers, if there are issues you want to raise that you felt have been missed, then we're open for any of that. And just as one last bit of clarity, which I didn't mention earlier on, is we have finished the work on this report. It's had 4 sets of reviewing and a second editor, and this whole process has meant that it's still with the designer having all the bits done so that we can release it on the world. So we can't actually send it to you today, but within a week or so, everyone who's here, we've got your emails, you will get the report. But the speakers have had a look at the draft. So yeah, I'd like to open the floor. Has anyone got any issues they would like to raise, any comments? How do we improve the circumstances around community engagement, and how do we tackle this issue of energy poverty? So I'll just look for any hands in the chat. And one of the issues that was raised was also around, the IDP. And, I mean, in our community program at Project 90, we've heard the same thing. Yes, it's there, but the question is, can communities actually really engage with it as much as they would like to. And if the IDP, as what you're saying, is your avenue where you can get things in, how do you improve the ability of people to have input there? So does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Sorry, could I come in on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you see, the IDP, because it's over 3 months, and any group can work with any counselor to try and create a program to put into the IDP. Now, I have good capabilities with language, and I have been able to make inputs into the IDP. So, for example, if this group and other groups that are interested in energy efficiency and trying to get tariffs to become more reasonable, if we worked together, then we could put a substantial amount into the IDP as a recommendation and then get people to back it up. So if a whole lot of people, like 1,000 or 2,000 people, were to then submit to the IDP office their support, then we would be able to put that into the IDP and then look for funding, whether it's from government source. Sometimes you can even get funding from outside of the country. For example, the German and the Dutch regularly support programs. So if we have that project, if people and communities are organized and they say, yes, let's work as a team, then it's not that difficult. So long as you've got one counselor in the city or anywhere in South Africa who is willing to be the partner in ensuring that it gets into the IDP. So we can do this collectively.
Okay, thanks, Farouk. Yeah, and I think that speaks to the whole sort of principle of just transition. Is a collective effort in getting people involved. And that's an idea we can maybe take forward, what you presented about working together as a collective to bring ideas into the IDP rather than relying on people individually having to do it. Thanks for that. Has anyone else got any topics they want to raise at this point? Otherwise, we can suggest some ideas that some questions we had. I don't know if Patrick or any of the other community members who are on the call, do you have any responses to any of the points that have been made so far? Let's see what's popped up in the chat here.
Richard, can I come in?
Yes, please do.
I think Councillor Farouk Kassim, you've raised an important point, but I think everyone is saying we need to work together. The question is, I think there are really good counsellors, and I spoke to 2 in the research, but there's a disconnect. So the question for me is the how, and I think there is work happening, and we've heard about from Reshmi's given some really good insights into the work they're doing, but the truth is there's an intention, and we're all saying the same thing. And I also for me the question is the real, how do we shift this so that it's more than a champion or a particular counsellor or an organization, a civil society organization doing the work. And then there's the second point that I want to, I saw in the 2 things in the chat. Lydia, you said here that communities need to have their voices heard, and that's what's come out really strongly. And what's sitting in my head also is something, Reshmi, you said, one of the counsellors that I interviewed, she said that A comment might be put out there about dog walking, for instance, but that's not what's important to a poor community. They need to put food on the table. So I suppose I'm just saying, how do we do this? And then the second thing that I want to engage with, Lydia and Schlengiwe raised the gender issue, which doesn't come out very strongly in the report. And I think that's something important that we maybe adjust slightly because we haven't finalized it, but I'd like to hear more from you around what you were thinking about the gender question.
Richard,
Right,
could I answer that, Richard?
Yep, go for it.
You're right. Now, the question, it's a good question. How do we do this? So we need to look at the 2021 iteration of the IDP. Look at how things are worded there and begin to start altering that wording. This is the trick with the IDP, that you have to deal with the wording so that the exact wording you want to see in the IDP is what then materializes. Now, this can be done by your group independently. We could meet in together and then take the ideas and then we frame it. We then pass it out to people and say to them, are you happy with the way in which we have framed it? Do you think that we should make any improvements? And then it is possible to submit it to the IDP on the basis, I can submit it as a counselor, or we can submit it jointly with all our names and say that we together are submitting this for inclusion into the IDP. And then at that stage, the draft goes out to the public for public participation. And this is where then all the activists can come in and say that, look, what we have put into the IDP, let us all support it. And then if the support comes from all directions, it becomes written into the IDP. And after that, it's a question of implementation. So the how can be managed either by you as a group or by all of us working together to actually write what should go into the IDP. That's how it can be done.
Thanks, Farouk, for that concrete suggestion. So building on what you said before, as a collective, it's specifically working on the wording in the IDP. Great. Lydia, you've got a hand up.
Lydia didn't have a hand
It's
up.
Gabriel on the side. I had a question.
Okay.
It's to, sorry. It's to anyone who can answer it in the space right now. So as you know, many might not know, so I'm a communications assistant and a youth ambassador for Project 90 by 2030. And I'm also the youth coordinator for the African Climate Alliance, which is a youth-led affinity movement. And so my question is, in regards to this, we've heard a lot about community engagement, and I completely believe that youth are a very pivotal and very essential part of community engagement. My question comes in, obviously I know a bit more, but maybe some clarity will be helpful. What was the kind of process what was the feedback from youth that you interviewed or got, the questionnaires back from, as well as in the space that we discussed, so there's conversations about having different levels of, or different groups of civil society work together in groups moving forward. In those spaces, what does the involvement of youth look like? I ask because I know that youth, I would like to see a lot more youth present, but when you talk with quote unquote adults, the issue comes up where it's like, no, we can give you like one spot on the table, and then that spot is ceremonial. So that's kind of my question that you can maybe talk to. Thank you.
Should I respond initially to that, Richard?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and we talked to community people and community leaders, but then we thought we need to hear the voice of the youth. And I think it's really critical that youth are brought in, and the kind of key messages coming out of the questionnaires to the youth were that they they can't meet their energy needs through FBE where they get it. And many of them raised the issue of illegal connections. And whilst they recognize that this poses a safety risk to them and their families, they said, we need electricity, so we have to ignore that risk. But what came up very strongly was also being informed and educated and having voices heard. And so I hope I might have answered your question, but I also want to just respond to Councillor Kasim as well. And I hear what you're saying, but two of the people in government that I interviewed, so this is perhaps a more general comment, had previously worked for civil society organizations. And I think that there was a really pertinent comment from both those people, which was when they were in civil society, they were very critical of government and what government wasn't doing and wasn't coming to the party. And now being in government, they were seeing a different picture. And what that says to me is that it's not a simple let's work together, because we all come with our own baggage, if you like, our own perceptions of what civil society, what the community are like, and maybe a bit fearful, and what government are like, and very critical. So before you can engage, you have to face some of those issues, and they're not easy. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Can I reply, Richard?
Yep.
Look, it's not easy, but on the other hand, it is not impossible. What one needs to do, for example, on the question of climate emergency. Now, what I have done, I've raised this very sharply in council, but then I've also taken this up in the newspapers through letters which are regularly published, in which I continually challenge the mayor to make the declaration. So much so that he's now becoming very sensitive and says to me, look, we're not that far, opposed. We're in fact quite close. So I say to him, okay, if we're quite close, when are we going to close the gap? So it's a question of how hard you want to push. And as Lydia will also know, that you do not give up. And councillors have the platform. They got opportunities in meetings of council and of portfolios to be able to raise issues to such a degree that eventually fellow councillors toe the line and say, look, we're not going to fight this issue. We're going to now start finding commonality. That is how I wrote a letter to the minister, which is supported by all the councillors, that we should be able to get electricity from IPPs and do a little deal with them to say, when you have extra supply which you cannot sell, won't you give it to us free of charge so we can then distribute it to the poorer communities? So there are ways and means, and we must explore every single ways and means. And having been in Parliament, having been now in the city, I know that we can do things. For example, we submitted yesterday a bill to Parliament to completely change the way in which elections are taking place. Now, this would have been an impossibility in many quarters, but we've done it, and the bill is now in Parliament, and it's going to be ready for debate. So let's not put the challenge beyond our capabilities. If we work together, I assure you, I know from all my years of experience that together we can be a formidable force for good. It's just that we need to know that what is being done is being supported by everyone. That's what people want. If we have that consensus, that agreement, I will prove to you that we can achieve what would be close to miracles. Thank you.
Great, thanks once again, Farouk. Those encouraging words. I see Natalie has her hand up. Natalie, would you like to jump in here? You might still be on mute, Natalie. Okay, just while we wait for Natalie there were just two questions in the chat, if you haven't seen it, talking about the Department of Human Settlements and their informal settlement support program. If anyone on the call is from there, please say so. But as Peter said, they were part of the people we interviewed, and although they might not, energy might not be their number one priority, they are definitely part of the story, and there were some good information that came from them. So Natalie, okay, well, maybe she isn't able to connect there. And then just see there's another comment here in the chat from James. City of Cape Town's resilience strategy, property assessed clean energy program. That is something we do mention in the report. The question is, are there plans to trial the PACE model, and who would do that? I'm not sure, does anyone on the call have any knowledge about trials that would happen? I know it is something that is being investigated conceptually. Does anyone on the call have more knowledge about how exactly that would be done? Okay, I see a hand up. It looks like Mike Ward, if I got the name right.
Sorry, Richard. It's Stephen here from City of Cape Town C40. Just to respond,
Yep.
if I can, to James' question. Yes, it is. It's definitely something that the team in sustainable energy markets is looking at trialing, and there's a lot of discussion going on. I'm not directly involved myself, but I know my colleagues are. Mary Hawes sort of leading that work. It's something that we've been engaging with the city's finance team on exactly how it would work. But yeah, it's definitely one of the actions, as James points out, that was proposed in the resilience strategy, and which we're also taking forward in the climate action plan.
Great, thanks, Steve. If you know a little bit about it, do you just quickly want to, in a sentence or two, describe what exactly PACE is?
I will try. Yeah, essentially, it's a way of basically installing, say, renewable energy generation in a property, and financing it differently, so that and it's aimed at sort of middle income households, so that, you know, where there's challenges in putting up the capital. So what happens is a sort of third party would put up the capital, and the recoupment of the cost would be attached to the rates on that property, something along those lines. I think that's a very crude description. So it's not aimed at high income households who, you know, would be able to finance it themselves through their home loans or through their own finance, but at households that wouldn't easily be able to get access to such finance. And that would be to ultimately also adds value to the house. And then if someone sells that house, then, you know, the equipment, the assets would remain on the site of the property, on the roof or wherever it's installed, and then it would continue to be part of the house, and then ultimately it would sort of also be paid off, but through the rates account.
Great, thanks for that, Stephen. So yeah, and I can maybe just put a little bit in the chat, just a little brief summary from the report on that. And as Reshmi puts there, you can read about it in the 2020 Energy Services Market Report, and there's a link to it there. Yeah, so that's just another way of enabling more people to get involved. Because as you're saying, and rightly so, a lot of people are not able to put up the capital up front for these kind of things. So the fact that this can be financed back over time, and that the system that, or whatever that you put in, is linked to the property, not the individual, it just helps with rolling these things out. So thanks for that, Stephen. I do still see a hand up. Was that because Stephen, your name comes up here separately? There's another Mike Ward. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks very much, Richard. Mike Ward, and working with the climate investment funds and the multilateral development banks. And the piece of work that we've been trying to do is to develop a kind of strategic framework, I suppose, for just transition. So to look at things like procedural justice, which is obviously the focus of the discussion today, and then distributive justice, and particularly, I think, under procedural justice, to open up all of the kinds of things that various participants have been chatting about. So things like recognition, you know, who gets recognized in these conversations, which perspectives are given value or weight. Issues around participation, so how do we enable and support participation? And then, of course, around the institutional structures that enable that kind of engagement. And I'm just wondering whether people on the call know whether similar work is going on at a kind of really local level like this. So often we work at either these international levels or a national level, and the richness of this discussion is starting to highlight what happens at a very local level. So yeah, just whether those sorts of frameworks are being developed, whether people are using similar kinds of concepts to help us to focus strategically on key aspects of just transition. Yeah, whether it is things like access to electricity or recognition or participation. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, Mike. Thanks for that. Okay, I see Natalie's got her hand back up. Are you able to come in now, Natalie?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can now. Good.
Okay. I wasn't sure how to raise this, but
and maybe just introduce yourself quickly.
My name's Natalie, and I'm from Project 90, and I work in the Community Partnerships Program, and we capacitating local community activists to engage on electricity issues at government level. I feel that nobody has said this, unless when I drop out, somebody has said it already. But I think that there needs to be. I'm wanting to highlight the people's participation. We say that we want people to participate, but we are not. I think we are not listening to people properly. So number one, people are saying we don't have proper access to electricity. So that's a thing. And I think that the solutions or the options have to be extremely clear. I think it was Patrick who said, the problem is now. We are experiencing this for the last few years. That's the one thing. The other thing people are saying is that the IDP is not as accessible as everyone seems to think it is. It's a brilliant document, don't get me wrong, Mr. Kasim, and I absolutely agree that that is the way that one should go. But it's not going to help if what happens on the ground. So I really appreciate what the kinds of things that Mr. Kasim is saying, but the reality is that the ward council is inaccessible, that the ward committees are inaccessible, that people in government, people in local government are not hearing what people are saying. or how people are saying, and they're not coming to the table with solutions. So I feel that in terms of this question, or the study, this is a fundamental question. This should be the first thing. How do we solve the problem, you know? And I don't think that, yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Richard, could I come in there?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Look, you see, you don't need to have every single counselor on board. You just need one, because that counselor then can give you the opening to achieve what you want to achieve. And even now, for example, if half a dozen or a dozen people wanted to come to the next portfolio committee meeting, that could be easily arranged. And we could easily put an item up for discussion. All we need is an organized group of people to say that we are the people who would like to see this happen. For example, many people in South Africa do not know that Section 12B of the income tax allows businesses to, through depreciation, to write off the entire cost of the PV installation. So if we could take this message out to all of them and say, why are you not taking advantage of this? So if a whole lot of electricity is being generated through all of the people who can afford it, the surplus can then be made available to poorer people straight away. This doesn't have to be years and years in the making. We could be talking about months. But most businesses, if you were to ask them, do you know of Section 12B in the income tax, which gives you this break? Why are you not taking advantage of it? Why are you not reducing the cost of electricity to yourself? And then why are you not then helping to distribute the excess to poorer people? So if 10,000 people in the city of Cape Town were installing PV, there would be so much more electricity. And that the cost of buying electricity from Eskom would fall. Now, at the moment, there is a whole lot of electricity that is being stolen. Lots of people are connecting illegally. And the problem is that the transformers are blowing up. And all of these costs then becomes costs to the people who are buying electricity. So here's an opportunity for all of us to get together so that we can share the information and we can use the platforms that are available, not to complain about what can't be done, but what we can achieve and what we can do by working cooperatively. Thank you.
Thanks
Richard,
again.
I can't find my hand to put my hand up, but my hand's up.
Okay, great. I think Natalie had got in before you, so let me go to Natalie and then back to you. Natalie.
Okay.
Thanks, maybe. Anyway, so I want to assure Mr. Kasim that you are first on my list for appointments in the very, very near future, probably January. Me and all the people that we work with, we are going to come and talk to you about the solutions that you propose. In terms of the and it's very exciting. Yes, great. We're going to look at that. And I appreciate your enthusiasm. but I still feel that the challenges on the ground are insurmountable, but you're going to fix all that for us. But I do think in terms of the study, I hope that we are not going to perpetuate the view that alternative energy like wonder bags are the solution for poor people. People want access and deserve access and have the right to energy access as everyone else has. So when I switch on my light, I want to have electricity like everyone else. So the issue is not, in fact, it upsets me when people say that or suggest. I appreciate the good intention, and we also promote the use of wonder bags and alternative energy solutions. But at the end of the day, the key fight must be, or rather the key something must be, not fight, since not a violent word like fight. The key thing that we must be addressing is that we all have access to the grid. And I'm just saying that I hope that that is extremely clear in the report. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Natalie. Before we get to Peter, yes, I mean, that is mentioned, you know, this, the acknowledgement that people do want electricity where possible, and it's not all just about giving out other technologies. The main focus in the recommendations we're talking about is more the process of getting people involved. And in that process, that's where you can talk about things like, how do we get access to electricity rather than alternatives? How do we afford it? So the focus is really about the process of talking about things, and the type of stuff you're talking about is the type of thing that you do once these systems are set up. Peter, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I want to respond to Natalie, but I also want to acknowledge, Farouk, your being here at this meeting, your availability and your positiveness. And and it's fantastic to hear, Natalie, that you're going to set up a meeting, because that's what's being offered. I think the report is very clear that people want electricity. That's what they want, that's what they need, and that's what they have a right to, actually. And what would be really great in the last bit of this meeting is to maybe engage a little bit with our recommendations, because I think we really heard that people aren't, sorry, I just saw Reshmi's chat, so I got distracted, that people feel their voices aren't being heard. And I think we need to address that. So one way is take up Councillor Kasim's offer, but we came up with a few ideas, and I think it'd be really great to engage a little bit with those ideas in order to solve some of the problems that have been reiterated in this meeting. Thanks.
Cool, thanks for that, Peter. I can put those up on the screen just now. I see there's a in the chat from Ngiwe. Do you want to maybe talk us through that about, you know, productive uses of energy? Have you done any work on that?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. No, I haven't done I've done a little bit of it maybe 3 years ago, but I haven't done anything recently. But I have been doing some research around it on productive uses. But most of it is happening outside of South Africa. I don't think much of it is encouraged in South Africa. But when you talk about productive uses, it's like having communities starting businesses to be able to, such as a women's group starting a baking company, or being able to start a sewing business, or baking a magwinya, and all of those things. Is that while we're talking about energy access, it's great that people have lighting, and that is important. But it would be nice that you take it a step further, that people are able to then also start their own business. That way, well, we cancel the issue of affordability, because then people are able to then generate their own money to pay back the electricity. I think Rashmi has already touched on it around providing Wi-Fi to people. That what then in the next engagement around that is, you have access to Wi-Fi. What can you do with it? What can people actually, in terms of being able to generate money from having a Wi-Fi? So I think those kind of conversations need to also start happening with communities to say, don't just look at having access to it, but how can you ensure that generates income for you and your household? That's what I was thinking about. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And I guess that also feeds into part of this idea about communication education, is letting people know what opportunities there are if they have more energy, and there's possibly ways to make your own sort of money and businesses out of it. Just to follow on from Peter, I'll just share the slide that has the sort of 5 main areas of recommendations. If there is interest to talk about these any further, hopefully you can see them there. And, you know, like particularly the third one about establishing a mobile sort of unit. And this comes out of the idea that it's often difficult for communities to get to meetings. So can we take, you know, the conversation to them and also to demonstrate things. So if it is, you know, how to use alternative technologies to actually be able to show people how to do this, we thought would be good. But it'd be good to hear if people think this is a completely outlandish idea and it will never work. And this idea at the top of having a sort of working group on this, you know, that speaks to what Farooq is talking about, like a collective working on it. I mean, there are already groups interested in these type of things, but you know, one that is specifically looking at community engagement, or have we missed ones that are already out there and we just need to get them to work together? So I'd welcome if anyone does have thoughts on that. Otherwise, I just need to work out how to go back to the chat, or maybe Gabriel can let me know if anyone's got a hand up at the
Richard,
moment.
Can I come in on that, Richard?
Yes, please go.
Yeah, let's take the first one, establish an energy solutions working group. I would be happy to participate with such a group. I would like, you know, for that group then to, for example, come over to Sub-Council 10, where it's quite easy to arrange, you know, a meeting with Sub-Council 10, and then we get Khayelitsha as a starting point involved, then to set up a pilot project. So if we could take number 1 and number 5, we could make this a project for 2021. And I would be very, very happy indeed to meet with Natalie. And then if that project succeeds in Khayelitsha, then it could be extended also to Mitchell's Plain. Or if, you know, we need to do, if we have the capacity, then let's try and do 2 projects, one in Khayelitsha, one in Mitchell's Plain. And in that way, we begin to show to people how it is possible to access alternative energy in a cheaper way. So let's not forget about what I spoke about earlier, and that is the microgrid. We have had a lot of discussion about this in our portfolio committee, and I think we need to start educating people about why it is important to establish microgrids so that you could then get either free electricity supply or much cheaper electricity supply than at present through the ordinary grid. So this is what I would like to make, you know, as a parting shot, and leave you with that thought. And if there is support for it, then we can take it forward. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks once again, Farooq, for the enthusiasm and the willingness to take some of these ideas forward. Has anyone else got thoughts or wanting to volunteer that they could help out with us? And, you know, obviously if an idea like this gains a bit of traction, Project 90 could assist and maybe put a proposal together to get some funding for this type of thing. Perhaps other groups already do have funding that they're looking to put on things like this.
Richard, if no one else is coming on, I could take one other point that Shengyu were made. And that is, I have a motion in front of the council for the 3rd of December. And that motion is for establishing mesh network to allow Wi-Fi to be spread through communities that do not have Wi-Fi connection. So they can all watch out for this. It will be on the 3rd of December, and the topic will be mesh networking.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And that speaks to what I heard in some of the interviews about access to information, because if Wi-Fi is more available, then people can not only communicate, but access some information. I saw, I think, Patrick, is that your hand up again?
Mr. Farooq is trying to speed up this mentioning two areas, Kailicha and Mitchell's Plain. All the communities are important. Let's be flat-footed on that. That is my first point. Two, I'm not against what Mr. Farouk is saying about implementing this in Kailicha. But also, if we are going to implement this thing in Kailicha or Mitchell's Plain, it must be a job opportunity for our youth also. Because what we pick it up in this thing, if we look at ESCOM is giving the jobs to those who are already rich, you understand? Buying coals from those who are already rich, you understand? Here we want also to decentralize our economy, giving our youth opportunity to get work, to maintain those grids. You understand my point? And two, about this establishing the mobile show house. I don't want us to keep the information in one area or two areas. If the city and the province and national come together and said, okay, let's spread this word of energy, you understand? Let's have the mobile show house moving maybe twice a month to Karoo or whatever. I'm just mentioning the place, or West Coast. People must be aware of what is going to take place, and people must come up with also their solutions and their ideas. While we are busy with this thing, with these solar grids in Kailicha or Mitchell's Plain. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so I think those two ideas are speaking to different things. That the mobile unit can take information to lots of people. Obviously, with pilot projects, you have to start somewhere. So I think as Ms. Kasim has offered, you know, Kailicha or Mitchell's Plain are just ideas for where you could start, and not that it would be limited only to those places, but realistically, you do have to start somewhere, and starting somewhere is important. It's better than not starting at all. So, I mean, what would be great to hear is if any other people on the call would be interested in that type of collaboration. You don't necessarily have to say so now. You can pop us an email later or pop it in the chat. But yeah, thank you very much for these thoughts on this. We have a few minutes left before we need to close. Has anyone got anything else they'd like to raise that they feel has been missed, or that a question hasn't been answered, or that isn't clear? Now's your chance. Going once.
If no one else is, I don't want to hog the issue, but if no one else, then I would like to say one or two things.
That's fine. Let's just give anyone else a chance who does want to. We've got lots of people on the call. Don't be shy. If you do want to add in, please do. If not, which I don't see any, then yeah, back to you, Frog.
Okay, so the city of Cape Town has plans in the new year to install a major PV installation in Atlantis. And I have said to them that what we should do is allow for the panels then to be put up, and below that to be able to use that for agriculture. It is being shown worldwide that you can combine the two things together. You can increase supply of energy and supply of food in one fell swoop. And it's been happening in many parts of the world. And our ED, Kadri Nasip, and others were very excited about this and are taking it on board. So you see, we can do that. This will become the first big solar installation that the city is going to be tackling. Secondly, we need to take sites like dumping sites, which need to be sterilized. So we can't use them for other purposes, but we can use them for the generation of electricity. So my point that I have been emphasizing in the course of today is how can we produce surplus electricity? So much electricity that we can give some of that electricity away, either this coming from the independent power producers or from the electricity that we can generate on the rooftops of businesses, houses, and that which the city is going to be participating in. So the energy revolution is here. The transition has to happen very, very quickly. I'm an old guy, I'm 75 now, but my enthusiasm is as infectious as it was when I was 18. So come guys, look, I'm an old guy, but I really will run the pace with you. I won't be left behind. And I promise you, if you work together with me, we will be able to make things happen, and we will use the pilot projects to show to people how it can be done and which ways to finance that so that the constraints we have can be dealt with and we can produce the electricity that the city needs. If Cape Town can do it, then the rest of South Africa can, because we have more irradiation in South Africa than in most parts of the world. So while the sun shines, that is electricity that we could be using. So let's not waste the sunshine. Let's tap into it and let's produce the electricity that people want. It can be done. I'm saying to you, please believe me. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Farouk. And once again, the infectious enthusiasm, that is what we need. We have difficult problems, and that enthusiasm is very important. So thank you. Just before we wrap up, maybe Peter, is there anything else you want to add before I say some thanks and a way forward?
No, just to say, really great conversation and great to see enthusiasm around some of the recommendations, and just to thank the people who have made themselves available for interview. You know, really appreciate the time, and thank you to you and Project 90 for giving me this amazing, interesting opportunity of work. Thanks.
All right, great. Well, my last things are also some thanks. I mean, firstly, everyone on the call today, thanks for joining, for listening and contributing, and to Lydia, Farouk, and Reshmi for making time to enthusiastically get involved. I'd also like to thank FES, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Foundation. They financed this work. And I won't go through everyone else in the acknowledgements part of the report. I mean, we interviewed a lot of people. There was almost 60 people for the second part. There were people who helped with contacts. This was not just a few of us working on it. It was a lot of work. So just thanks to everyone who was involved. Everyone's email we will send the designed report once it is finished. And then we'll continue working on some of these ideas. Brooke will be in touch with you. And hopefully the idea with this is, yes, it's a report and it provides information, but we wanted it to lead to some sort of action, because without action, we're just going to continue with the way things are, and we'd like to improve things from how they are if possible. So that's it from me. Keep an eye on the email for the report and that. And yeah, thanks for joining today, and we'll chat again soon.